Hi, I'm Rob Jones from Romor Designs, and I'm talking today with David Owen Hastings. David is a graphic designer, gallery artist, and a modern quilter, and he's based to the west of Seattle in the States. I got to know David through Brian Whitehead, international shibori and indigo artist who lives in Japan, when we went to a workshop at Brian's, which is the most amazing place. He lives in the mountains in a beautiful silk farmhouse to the west of Tokyo. And I guess we kind of stayed friends since then, really. David's a really, really great artist. I'm really delighted that he's able to come and do some stuff for us for the Japanese Textiles Festival, which is happening the weekend of the week of the 26th to the 30th of May. So just over to David, really. I mean, David, do you want to tell me a little bit about your background?
Sure. Well, I grew up doing all kinds of needle arts. I learned to knit when I was in grade school, and so one of my grandmothers taught me how to sew. And there wasn't quilting in our family so much, but that came later in my life. But I have always stitched things, and that led to stitching paper in my adult life and for my gallery work. And then I kind of circled back to quilting more recently in my life, and have been sort of entranced by the world of modern quilting. And that's kind of the nutshell. And I've always loved Japan. Ever since I was a child, I've had this affinity for everything Japanese. So somehow that all came together to bring me to indigo and shibori and our connection as well.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you about indigo. This is just such a magical thing to do, watching the color change when you take your pieces out of the vat. So yeah, I really get the excitement of that. So what really was your sort of impetus to start working with the paper and the indigo? Do you want to tell me a little bit about that, please?
Well, that was sort of a what if I try this moment. I've been making my stitch paper work for over 2 decades, and the indigo dyeing has been a more recent activity in the last couple of years. And I was doing some dyeing with some friends in the Seattle area, and it was a couple of day workshop that we were doing together just as a group of friends. And I realized that the printmaking paper that I often use is cotton based. And I thought, well, what if I dip my paper into the indigo and see what happens? And then I just started dipping more things. I took some cotton quilt batting, and I bound it in a shibori way and dipped that. I then started using other papers that I work with, very thin papers, and stitched them with my sewing machine for a stitched resist instead of by hand, because it was it'd be very hard to hand stitch paper to bind it. And that worked great in the indigo vat. So it was just sort of a what if moment. I thought, let's try this and see what happens. And really the paper took to the indigo beautifully, and it's very vibrant.
Brilliant. Okay. And what do you sort of love about the sort of Japanese side of things, the kind of the shibori and the indigo stuff?
Oh gosh, there's just so many amazing textile traditions in Japan. And because they're, as a country, they were shut off, they closed themselves off from the rest of the world for a very long time. So their crafts were developed to this beautiful exquisite degree. And indigo dyeing is one of those, with all these different methods of binding and resisting fabric to create pattern. And I don't know, it just seems very fascinating. And you mentioned, taking the piece out of the vat at first, it comes out green, which is so interesting. And then before your eyes, it turns the classic blue that we all think of. And I don't know, there's just sort of a magical quality to it. And, blue and white as a palette is just very peaceful, and fits with my personal kind of approach to life. So I don't know, it's just kind of a number of things that make it attractive.
Yeah. Oh no, I completely understand with the blues, and there's such a range of blues you can get as well, isn't there? Right. So that's very exciting. So would you be able to show us some examples of your work?
Yeah. In fact, if it's okay, I'll show you examples from my 2 lectures that I'm giving at the Japan and Textile and Crafts Festival, and that has lots of great examples in it. So let me go ahead and share. So Here's some of the paper that I dyed, by the way,
Wow.
in indigo. So yeah, so I'll both Rob and I will be presenting at this wonderful Japanese Textile and Craft Festival here at the end of May. And Rob's giving some hands-on workshops. I'm giving 2 lectures, and he's also doing a lecture as well. My first lecture is about the indigo dyeing process, and this is pretty much centered around this trip I made 2 years ago to Brian Whitehead's workshop in Fujino, Japan. And so the lecture is wonderful. It talks about 2 primary methods of resisting the fabric so that to create pattern. What is katazome? And so I will take you through the process of creating the stencils, pasting the fabric, and then here's what it looks like when it's ready to dye, and then dipping it into the indigo vat to create the beautiful blue indigo color, and then the resulting pattern. And these, actually, as a side note, these patterns are stencils that I cut for that workshop. I cut them before going to Japan. There was a lot of homework, as you recall.
Oh, really beautiful.
Thank you. So I had a lot of fun making those. And then the second technique I'll be talking about in that lecture is shibori, which pretty much everybody knows, bound resist dyeing. There's so many different ways to bind fabric to create tight spots that resist the indigo when you're working with it. Here's one little piece that's ready to go into the dye vat. And there's so many ways. These are a couple of different ways. Binding it to a pole is one way. This mokume on the right here technique, where you create little rows of stitches and then pull them up, and that kind of creates a wood grain pattern. Really gorgeous. And I've got tons of images to share and inspiration and wonderful ideas for indigo dyers. One of the fun things that happened there is that we got to do a lot of other cultural things too. So I'll be talking about some other things as well, like food and architecture and such. But this is the piece I made when I came home. It's hanging up here behind me. It's a quilt, and a king size one. And it's featuring all the fabric that I dyed when I was there in Japan. And it's kind of a fun keepsake for me for memory of my time there.
Yeah, that looks great.
Thank you. Yeah, just the number of patterns is endless, and many of them have specific names. Rob, you know so many of them. I'm not as knowledgeable about them as you, but it's really fun to experiment. Then the second lecture that I'm going to be giving is about my stitched paper artwork, and I call it Exploring Nature with Paper and Stitch. And in that lecture, I'll be sharing some of my pieces, not just indigo, but a variety. I do a monotype printing technique where that I'll explain in this lecture, where I transform the paper with acrylic paint, and I also combine it with photographs that I've taken and digitally printed. And so this is all paper that I've either printed myself or photos I've made and stitched together.
Love it.
And thank you. I call these pieces my paper quilts because they're constructed a lot like a quilt, in blocks, and then the blocks are attached to each other. And so there's definitely a crossover between my paperwork and my modern quilts. So
really
quite fun here.
striking.
Thank you. Here's another one. This is all stitched on the sewing machine, just using straight line stitching and zigzag. I have a number of ways to deal with bigger pieces of paper on a small sewing machine, but it's kind of a fun challenge. And here's some of the pieces that we spoke about earlier, where I experimented with dipping my paper into the indigo vat. And so this is the same technique I'm doing with my stitched paper collages, but using the indigo to transform the paper instead of mono printing it. There's a close-up of that one. But it really took the indigo beautifully. I was like jumping up and down like a kid when I realized how well it was working. Here's a close-up of one.
what paper are you using for that?
Yeah, so I use a number of different kinds. The base paper, I'll just back up a little bit. The base paper, the big piece of paper in this piece is printmaking paper. It's called BFK Reeves, and it's a cotton-based printmaking paper. It's kind of the weight of like a watercolor paper. It's a little stiff. And then I use very thin papers to do the folding and the stitching. And one of them is a commercial paper that's called Silk Span. And Silk Span, it's very thin, but it's very strong. And it's made for people who make model airplanes. They use it for the skin of the airplane after they create the armature.
Oh,
And
wow.
it holds up so great to being manipulated with stitching and dyeing and all that. It doesn't fall apart. And I also use some Japanese washi, like mulberry paper as well, but it doesn't hold up as well to getting wet as this stuff. So yeah,
Cool.
so that's that. I want to just mention quickly, this is not something I mentioned in these two lectures, but it's a workshop that I give, and just Japan themed. I've developed a workshop based on being inspired by Japanese art. So I love how in these ukiyo-e prints, woodblock prints, they're often depicting people in beautiful kimono. And the way that fabric is depicted in 2 dimensions in these old prints is just really beautiful to me. And I think it can be a fun thing to work with and abstract and create textile art based on what you see in these old woodblock prints. So this is an example of how I took that woodblock print and broke it down into abstract elements, and then created a quilt based on that print. And it's kind of my marrying of my love of Japan with modern minimalism in quilting. And also this has got a ton of vintage fabric. It's got a black jacquard obi in it. It's got, you know, old men's kimono that tend to be a little more somber colors and simple patterns. And it was really fun to make.
That's
Here's a little close up of that one. So, and I love machine quilting to kind of tie everything together. And I love thinking about the quilting line as a textural element that you add on top of the design, and think about it as this kind of gossamer layer of design that floats over the quilt. It's very, very appealing to me. So if people want to learn more, or if you want to get links to sign up for the lectures through the festival, you can visit my website. There's information there, or follow me on Instagram. Also, you follow Rob. He's got all the information on his website, in fact, and you can just click the links and sign up for these Eventbrite sessions directly there.
Brilliant. So just remind people the dates and times of your lectures, could you?
Yes. Okay. You're asking me to remember this off the top of my head. I'm gonna cheat and look. So the 27th of May, it's a Thursday, at 4 p.m. UK time and 8 a.m. Pacific time here in the US is the Indigo Dyeing in Japan lecture. And then Friday the 28th, 4 p.m. UK time, 8 a.m. Here in the Pacific is Exploring Nature with paper and stitch. And then Rob, you've got a lecture and 2 hands-on workshops, is that correct?
Yeah, so the 26th at 4 p.m, which is 8 a.m. Pacific time, I'm doing a general lecture on Japanese textiles techniques. So I'm going to cover a bit about shibori, katagami, sashiko, boro mending, kazuri, and a bit of kimono and stuff like that, and show some examples of some of the nice fabrics that I've collected on my travels to Japan. And the real world classes are on the Thursday, and the Friday I'm doing boro and kogen. So, but I mean, I'll talk more about that another time. But listen, thank you, David. It's been amazing.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Today. Really, really great to see you. And I'm sure that people that tune in for your lectures will really enjoy them. I just that little taste of the stuff you just showed me was so cool.
Yeah, I think of it as armchair travel. You'll get to travel with me to Japan, and even though you may not be hands-on or in real life, you'll feel like you've taken a little adventure. So it'll be fun.
Excellent. Okay, thanks, David.
All
Bye
right,
now.
cheers. We'll see
Bye.
you soon.
Cheers.